The stagecoach door swung open in Ruby City, Montana, and Theresa Turner stepped into a December blizzard that felt like stepping into a wall of ice, her swollen belly catching on the doorframe as she struggled down the steps into snow that reached past her ankles. Isaac Jennings watched from the doorway of the general store, where he had been loading supplies onto his wagon, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air as he squinted through the white curtain of falling snow. The woman stumbled, caught herself against the side of the coach, and he was moving before his mind fully registered the decision. His boots crunched through the fresh powder as he reached her side just as her knees buckled. "Easy now," he said, catching her elbow with one gloved hand. Up close, he could see her lips had gone nearly blue with cold, and her thin coat was completely inadequate for Montana winter. "Where are you headed?" "The boarding house," she managed through chattering teeth, one hand protectively cradling her belly. "Mrs. Patterson's place." Isaac's jaw tightened. He knew exactly where that was, and he also knew that Ethel Patterson had sold her boarding house 3 months ago and moved to California. "That place is closed, madam. Mrs. Patterson is gone." The woman's green eyes widened, and Isaac saw the exact moment when fear replaced cold as her primary concern. Snow gathered on her dark brown hair, melting into the loose strands that had escaped from beneath her inadequate bonnet. She could not have been more than 22 or 23 years old, he estimated, though the exhaustion in her face made it hard to tell. "But she wrote that she had a room for me," Theresa said, her voice cracking slightly. "I sent payment 2 months ago. I have her letter right here." She fumbled with frozen fingers at her handbag, nearly dropping it before Isaac steadied her again. The stagecoach driver tossed down a battered carpetbag and a small trunk, calling out, "That is all, miss. Good luck to you." He climbed back up to his seat, clearly eager to reach the next station before the storm worsened. Isaac made a quick decision, the kind he had learned to make during his years working cattle drives before settling in Ruby City. "My wagon is right here. I will take you somewhere warm and we will sort this out." "I cannot impose on a stranger," Theresa protested, but her body betrayed her as she swayed again, and Isaac caught her more firmly this time. "You are not imposing. You are accepting help before you freeze to death in the street." His voice was gruff, but not unkind. He had been raised better than to leave a woman, especially an expectant one, alone in a blizzard. "Can you walk to the wagon?" she nodded, and he kept his hand on her elbow as they moved through the deepening snow. The main street of Ruby City was nearly deserted, with most sensible folks already inside by their fires. Isaac helped Theresa onto the wagon seat, then quickly loaded her bags into the back with his supplies. He swung up beside her and grabbed the heavy wool blanket he kept under the seat, wrapping it around her shoulders. "Where are we going?" she asked as he took up the reins. "My place. I have a cabin about 2 miles outside town. It is not much, but it is warm and dry." He saw her stiffen and added quickly, "I will sleep in the barn. You will be safe, I give you my word." Theresa studied his face, and whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. "Thank you. I am Theresa Turner. Isaac Jennings." He clicked his tongue at the horses, and they started forward into the storm. The animals knew the way home even through the blinding snow, which was fortunate because visibility had dropped to almost nothing. Isaac kept the horses at a steady walk, knowing that pushing them faster would risk the wagon sliding off the road. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon, the whisper of snow against their coats, and the labored breathing of the horses. Isaac snuck glances at his passenger, noting the way she kept one hand on her belly and the other clutching the blanket tight around her shoulders. She was shivering violently despite the blanket. "How far along are you?" he asked, then immediately felt his face warm despite the cold. It was not really his business, but he needed to know in case she went into labor tonight. 7 months, Theresa answered quietly. The baby is due in late February. Isaac did the math in his head. That gave them roughly 10 weeks, maybe less. He hoped the roads would be passable by then so he could get her to the doctor in town when the time came. Montana winters were unpredictable that way. "You have other family in Ruby City?" he asked, trying to understand what had brought her here alone and clearly unprepared. "No." The single word was flat, discouraging further questions, and Isaac respected that. Everyone who came west had their reasons, and many of those reasons involved leaving something painful behind. The cabin finally appeared through the snow, a solid structure Isaac had built himself over the past 2 years. It was made of thick pine logs with a stone chimney, a covered porch, and a barn about 30 yards away. Smoke was not rising from the chimney, which meant the fire had died down to embers, but the place would still be warmer than staying outside. Isaac pulled the wagon right up to the porch steps. "Wait here a moment," he said, jumping down. He hurried to unlock the door and went inside, immediately feeding kindling into the fireplace. Once he had flames crackling to life, he returned to help Theresa down from the wagon. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet touched the ground, and Isaac found himself sweeping her up into his arms without thinking. She weighed almost nothing despite her pregnancy, which concerned him. He carried her inside and set her carefully in the rocking chair closest to the now blazing fire. "I need to tend to the horses and unload the wagon," he said. "There are more blankets on the bed over there. Make yourself warm." Theresa nodded, her teeth still chattering too hard for speech. Isaac quickly brought in her bags and his supplies, piling everything just inside the door. Then he went back out into the storm to unhitch the horses and get them settled in the barn with feed and water. The animals deserved the care after getting them home safely through that weather. By the time Isaac returned to the cabin, stamping snow from his boots, Theresa had wrapped herself in 2 more blankets and moved even closer to the fire. Color was finally returning to her face, though she still looked exhausted. He hung his coat on the peg by the door and removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "Are you hungry?" he asked, moving to the small kitchen area. His cabin was essentially one large room with a sleeping area at one end, a kitchen at the other, and the living space with the fireplace in the middle. It was designed for a single man, not for company, but it would have to do. "I do not want to be any trouble," Theresa said, but her stomach betrayed her by growling loudly enough for him to hear across the room. Isaac allowed himself a small smile. "It is no trouble. I need to eat anyway." He pulled out a pot and started preparing a simple stew with salt pork, potatoes, carrots, and onions. While it cooked, he made coffee, strong and hot. The aroma of food and coffee gradually filled the cabin, and Isaac saw Theresa's posture relax slightly. She watched him move around the kitchen with a wary expression that suggested she was still not entirely sure what to make of her situation or her reluctant host. When the stew was ready, Isaac ladled generous portions into 2 bowls and brought them to the small table near the fire. "Come eat," he said, pulling out a chair for her. Theresa rose carefully from the rocking chair and made her way to the table, settling into the offered seat. Isaac sat across from her, and for a few minutes they ate in silence. He was pleased to see she had a good appetite despite her earlier exhaustion. "This is very good," Theresa said finally. "Thank you. It is nothing fancy, but it fills the belly." Isaac took a sip of his coffee. "We should talk about what happens next." She set down her spoon, and he saw fear flicker in her eyes again. "I have some money. Not much, but I can pay you for room and board until I figure something out. Mrs. Patterson's letter said there was work available in town for women willing to take in sewing or washing. Isaac considered this. There might be come spring. But right now, with this storm, you are stuck here at least until the road's clear, and I will not take your money. I cannot accept charity, Theresa said, her chin lifting with a pride Isaac recognized. He had felt the same way when he first came west with nothing but the clothes on his back and determination in his heart. It is not charity. I could use help around here. I am not much of a cook beyond basic meals, and the place could use a woman's touch. He gestured at the cabin, which was clean enough but definitely showed signs of bachelor living. If you are willing to help with cooking and such, we can call it even. Theresa studied him again with those sharp green eyes. Why are you doing this? Because it is the right thing to do, Isaac said simply. My mother raised me to help people when they need it, and you clearly need help right now. She was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but only until spring. Once the baby comes and I can travel again, I will find my own way. Fair enough. Isaac stood and began clearing the dishes. You take the bed tonight. I will make up a bedroll by the fire. You said you would sleep in the barn, Theresa reminded him. I did, but I am not fool enough to sleep in an unheated barn when there is a blizzard outside. The fire will be fine. I have slept in worse places. That was true enough. He had spent many nights during cattle drives sleeping on the hard ground with nothing but a thin bedroll and the stars overhead. Theresa looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. Thank you, she said softly. Isaac showed her where the wash basin was and gave her privacy while she prepared for bed. He busied himself making up his bedroll near the fire, adding more logs to keep the flames going through the night. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters, and he was grateful they had made it back before the storm grew worse. When Theresa emerged from behind the privacy screen wearing a nightgown and wrapped in a shawl, Isaac politely turned his attention to banking the fire. He heard the bed frame creak as she climbed in, and then her quiet voice saying, "Good night, Isaac." "Good night, Theresa." He stretched out on his bedroll, using his saddle as a pillow the way he had countless times before. Despite the unusual circumstances, he fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's work and the effort of getting home through the storm. The blizzard lasted 3 days. During that time, Isaac and Theresa settled into a cautious routine. Each morning, Isaac would wake first and restart the fire, then head out to the barn to tend to the animals. He had 2 horses, a milk cow, and a few chickens that provided eggs. When he returned, Theresa would have breakfast prepared using the supplies he kept in the cabin. The forced proximity could have been uncomfortable, but instead they found an easy rhythm. Theresa proved to be an excellent cook, able to transform Isaac's simple provisions into meals that were far better than anything he had managed on his own. In return, he made sure she never had to venture out into the cold, bringing in firewood and water and doing the heavy chores. They talked during meals, gradually learning about each other. Isaac discovered that Theresa was originally from Illinois, the daughter of a schoolteacher. She had received a good education and loved to read, which explained why she spoke with such care and used no frontier slang. He noticed she never mentioned the baby's father, and he did not ask. For her part, Theresa learned that Isaac was 25 years old, originally from Missouri. He had worked various ranches as a cowboy before saving enough money to buy this land and build his cabin. His dream was to have his own ranch someday, with good cattle and horses. His parents had both passed away from fever when he was 18, and he had no siblings. The West had called to him as it did to many young men seeking a fresh start. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. Isaac woke to silence, the absence of howling wind almost startling after days of constant noise. He rose and opened the door to find the world transformed. Snow lay in deep drifts everywhere, sparkling in the bright morning sunlight. The sky was a brilliant blue, not a cloud in sight. "It is beautiful," Theresa said from behind him. She had wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and came to stand in the doorway, careful to stay inside where it was warm. "Beautiful and dangerous," Isaac replied. "The road to town will be impassable for at least a few more days, maybe a week." He glanced at her. "Is that a problem?" "Do you have supplies you need from town?" She shook her head. "I am fine, though I imagine you have work you need to do." "Nothing that cannot wait." He pulled on his coat and gloves. "I need to dig us out a bit and check on the animals. Why do not you stay inside where it is warm?" Theresa nodded and retreated to the fire. Isaac spent the next several hours shoveling snow, creating paths from the cabin to the barn and the well. The physical labor felt good after days cooped up inside, and he found his mind wandering as he worked. He kept thinking about Theresa. She was clearly educated and genteel, not the type of woman he had expected to meet way out here. Something had driven her west alone and pregnant, something she was not ready to talk about. Isaac respected that, but he also found himself increasingly curious about her story. More than that, he found himself drawn to her in ways that surprised him. She was beautiful, there was no denying that, but it was more than physical attraction. He admired her strength and pride, the way she refused to be helpless despite her circumstances. He enjoyed their conversations during meals, the way her face lit up when she talked about books or described the school where her father had taught. She had a quick wit and a gentle sense of humor that made him smile. Isaac stopped shoveling and leaned on his shovel, staring out at the snow-covered landscape. This was foolish. She was pregnant with another man's child, planning to leave come spring. He had no business developing feelings for her, and yet he could not seem to help himself. A sound from the barn distracted him from these thoughts. He went to investigate and found that the cow had somehow knocked over her water bucket. After refilling it and making sure all the animals had enough feed, he headed back to the cabin. The smell of fresh bread greeted him as he stomped the snow from his boots and entered. Theresa had been busy while he was outside, and the cabin was filled with delicious aromas. She had not only baked bread, but had also prepared a pot of beans with bacon and molasses. "You have been working hard," Isaac observed, hanging up his coat. "So have you. I watched you from the window. That is a lot of snow." Theresa smiled at him, and Isaac felt something warm unfurl in his chest. They ate lunch together, and afterward Isaac brought in Theresa's trunk and bags from where they had been sitting by the door. "You should unpack your things," he said. "Make yourself comfortable." Theresa hesitated, then nodded. While she sorted through her belongings, Isaac took the opportunity to do some work he had been putting off. He had a pile of leather that needed mending, straps and reins that had worn through and needed replacing. He sat up at the table with his tools and got to work. The afternoon passed peacefully. Isaac worked on his leather mending while Theresa organized her possessions. She had brought mostly practical items, he noticed. Sturdy dresses, sensible shoes, sewing supplies, and a small stack of precious books. There were also baby clothes, lovingly made by hand. The sight of tiny gowns and blankets gave Isaac a strange feeling, reminding him that in a few months there would be an infant here. That thought led to another realization. Where exactly would Theresa give birth? He tried to remember if there was a midwife in Ruby City and thought there might be, but he was not certain. The nearest doctor was definitely in town, but what if the roads were still bad when her time came? February was often the worst month for snow. "Isaac." Theresa's voice interrupted his increasingly worried thoughts. Are you all right? You look troubled. He set down the leather strap he had been working on. I was just thinking about the baby, about making sure you have what you need when the time comes. Theresa's hand went to her belly in that protective gesture he had seen countless times over the past few days. I have been thinking about that too. I was supposed to have Mrs. Patterson to help me and the doctor in town, but now I am not sure what to do. We will figure something out, Isaac said with more confidence than he felt. Maybe once the road's clear, I can take you into town and we can make arrangements with the doctor. Make sure he knows to come out here when you need him, assuming the weather cooperates. That would ease my mind considerably, Theresa admitted. She sat down across from him at the table, watching as he went back to his leather work. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you not married? You seem like the type of man who would want a family. Isaac considered how to answer that. I suppose I never met the right woman. I spent years working cattle drives, moving from place to place. That is no life for building a family, and since I settled here, I have been focused on building up the ranch, making something of myself. I always figured there would be time for marriage later. You get lonely out here by yourself. Sometimes, he admitted. But I have the animals and I go into town often enough to see people. What about you? Do you miss Illinois? Theresa's expression clouded. I miss certain things. My father, the library. But no, I do not miss Illinois itself. Isaac waited to see if she would say more, but she fell silent, her gaze distant. He went back to his leather work, giving her space with her memories. That evening, as they ate dinner, Theresa suddenly said, I was married. Briefly. That is whose child I carry. Isaac set down his fork, giving her his full attention. He did not speak, sensing she needed to tell this in her own way. His name was Robert. We married last year. He was a clerk in a law office, well regarded in town. My father approved of the match. Theresa's voice was steady but quiet. What my father did not know, what I did not know until after the wedding, was that Robert had a terrible temper. He would drink and become violent. Isaac felt his jaw tighten with anger, but he kept his voice gentle. Did he hurt you? Several times. I tried to hide it, made excuses. I thought perhaps if I was a better wife, if I could just learn what set him off, things would improve. She shook her head. They only got worse. Then I discovered I was expecting a child and I knew I could not stay. I could not raise a baby in that situation. What did you do? Robert went away on business for a week. I took what money I had saved, packed what I could carry, and left. I went to stay with a cousin in another town. That is where I saw Mrs. Patterson's advertisement seeking boarders. She made Ruby City sound like a place where a woman could make a fresh start. I wrote to her, and she responded with such kindness, offering me a room and helping me find work. So I used the last of my money for the stagecoach ticket and came here. Does Robert know where you are? No. And my father passed away shortly before I left. There is no one who would tell Robert where I have gone. Theresa met Isaac's eyes. I know what people will think, seeing me pregnant and without a husband. I know I will face judgment, but I would rather face that than stay with a man who hurt me. Isaac reached across the table and carefully covered her hand with his. You did the right thing, and anyone who would judge you for protecting yourself and your child is not worth your concern. Tears welled in Theresa's eyes. Thank you for saying that. And thank you for not asking questions before I was ready to answer them. Everyone deserves their privacy, and everyone deserves to be safe. Isaac squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. You are safe here, Theresa. I give you my word that no one will hurt you while you are under my roof. She wiped at her eyes, composing herself. You are a good man, Isaac Jennings. I try to be. He picked up his fork again. Now eat. You need to keep your strength up. The weeks that followed developed a pattern that felt almost domestic. Isaac found excuses to stay close to the cabin rather than riding out to check on the cattle in the far pastures. He told himself it was because of the unpredictable weather, but he knew the truth. He did not want to leave Theresa alone for long. Christmas came and went quietly. Isaac cut a small pine tree and brought it inside, and Theresa made decorations from scraps of fabric and paper. They had a special dinner of roasted chicken and potatoes, and Isaac gave Theresa a warm wool shawl he had bought in town months ago but never found a use for. She gave him a new shirt she had sewn from fabric in her trunk, having noticed that his current shirts were becoming worn. As January arrived, Isaac found his thoughts increasingly occupied with the future. Theresa's pregnancy was advancing, her belly growing rounder, and he often caught himself watching her move around the cabin, imagining what it would be like if this was truly their home, their child she carried. He knew these thoughts were dangerous. She had never given any indication that she wanted anything from him beyond temporary shelter. She still spoke of leaving in the spring, of finding her own way. And yet, he could not help hoping that perhaps she might choose to stay. One cold January afternoon, when the winter sun was already sinking toward the horizon despite the early hour, Isaac went out to the barn to work on a project he had been planning. He selected good pine boards from his lumber supply and carried his tools to the workbench he had set up in the corner. He had never built a cradle before, but he had seen them and understood the basic construction. More importantly, he wanted to do this for Theresa, to give her something solid and beautiful for her baby. He worked carefully, measuring twice before making each cut, smoothing each piece of wood until it was free of splinters. The work took him several hours each day over the course of 2 weeks. He kept the project secret, working in the barn so Theresa would not see what he was making. He carved gentle curves into the rockers, ensured the sides were high enough to keep a baby safe but low enough for a mother to easily reach her child. He sanded everything until the wood was smooth as silk. When it was nearly done, he carried it into town one day when the roads had finally cleared enough for travel. He bought the materials he needed for a small mattress, soft fabric that would not irritate a baby's delicate skin, and batting to stuff it with. He also visited the doctor and made arrangements for the man to come to the cabin when Theresa's time arrived, paying in advance to ensure the doctor's cooperation. The whole time Isaac was in town, he found himself hurrying, eager to get back to the cabin. Back to Theresa. It was becoming increasingly difficult to pretend that his feelings for her were simply neighborly concern. He was falling in love with her, had probably been falling since that first moment when he caught her arm in the blizzard. But what could he do about it? She was still technically a married woman, even if she had fled her husband. And she had never indicated that she saw him as anything more than a kind stranger who had helped her in a desperate moment. Isaac agonized over these questions as he drove his wagon back through the snow, the completed cradle hidden beneath a tarp in the back. When he arrived at the cabin, Theresa was at the window watching for him. She opened the door as he pulled up, relief evident on her face. "I was starting to worry," she called out. "It is getting dark. I am sorry. I had some business in town that took longer than expected." Isaac hopped down from the wagon and began unloading supplies. He left the cradle hidden for now, planning to bring it in later when he could make it a surprise. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Theresa spoke up hesitantly. "Isaac, I have been thinking. I need to prepare for the baby's arrival, but I have nowhere to put the child to sleep. I was wondering if you might have some wood I could use to build a simple box or crate that could serve as a cradle." Isaac smiled to himself. "I might have something better than a crate. Wait here." He pulled on his coat and went out to the wagon, carefully lifting the cradle and carrying it inside. Teresa's eyes widened as she saw what he had made, her hand going to her mouth. "You made this," she whispered, standing and walking over to examine it. "When did you find time?" "I have been working on it in the barn for the past 2 weeks. I wanted it to be a surprise." Isaac set the cradle down near the fire, gently rocking it to show how smoothly the rockers moved. "I still need to finish the mattress, but the cradle itself is done." Theresa ran her hand along the smooth wood, tears streaming down her face. "It is beautiful. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." She looked up at him, and the emotion in her eyes made Isaac's heart pound. "Why would you do something like this for me?" "Because I love you," he thought. "Because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Because when I picture the future, you are always there." But he could not say those things, not yet. So instead he said, "Because every child deserves a proper cradle, and because I wanted to." Theresa stepped forward, and before Isaac quite knew what was happening, she had wrapped her arms around him in an embrace. He stood frozen for a moment, then carefully put his arms around her, acutely aware of her belly pressed against him, the baby between them. She was warm and soft and smelled like the lavender soap she used, and Isaac had to resist the urge to hold her tighter. "Thank you," she said quietly against his chest. "For everything. For taking me in, for treating me with kindness and respect, for making this beautiful cradle. I do not know what I would have done if you had not been there that day in the blizzard." "I am glad I was there," Isaac said, his voice rougher than usual. He cleared his throat. "You should sit down. You have been on your feet too long today." She pulled back, wiping her eyes and laughing a little. "Always worrying about me. Someone has to." He guided her to the rocking chair and went to put the kettle on for tea. As he moved around the kitchen, he was intensely aware of her presence, of how domestic and right this all felt. He was in serious danger of doing something foolish, like telling her exactly how he felt. That would likely just make things uncomfortable for both of them, especially since she would be leaving in a few months. February arrived with more snow, but also signs of the coming spring. The days grew slightly longer, though the nights were still bitterly cold. Theresa was very pregnant now, moving more slowly and often resting her hands on her lower back. Isaac found himself watching her constantly, ready to help if she needed anything. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Theresa suddenly gasped and grabbed her belly. Isaac was on his feet immediately. "What is wrong? Is it time?" "No, no," she said quickly, then laughed. "The baby is just very active tonight. Here, feel." She reached out and grabbed his hand before he could protest, placing it on her belly. Isaac froze, acutely aware that this was highly improper, but then he felt it. A strong push against his palm, unmistakably a tiny foot or hand. His eyes widened in wonder. "That is incredible," he breathed. "Does it hurt when the baby moves like that?" "Not hurt exactly. Sometimes it is uncomfortable, especially when the baby decides to kick my ribs. But mostly it is just reassuring. It reminds me that the baby is healthy and strong." She kept his hand pressed to her belly, and Isaac felt another movement, then another. "I have felt cattle and horses foaling before, but this is different," Isaac said. "This is a person in there, a whole tiny human." Theresa smiled. "It is amazing, is it not? I spent the first few months terrified, wondering how I could possibly manage. But now I find myself eager to meet this child. I want to see whose eyes the baby has, what the baby's personality will be like." Isaac reluctantly withdrew his hand, aware that they were treading dangerously close to a level of intimacy that could complicate their arrangement. But the moment had changed something between them, made the baby real to him in a new way. This was not just some abstract concept anymore. This was a child who would be born soon, who would need care and protection. "Have you thought of names?" he asked, returning to his chair. Some. For a girl, I like Margaret after my mother. For a boy, perhaps James or Thomas. She looked at him curiously. What names do you like? They spent the rest of the evening discussing names, trading ideas and stories about people they had known with various names. It was easy and comfortable, and Isaac found himself thinking that this was what marriage should be like. Two people talking about important things, making plans together, sharing their thoughts and dreams. When they finally went to bed, Isaac lay awake on his bedroll by the fire, staring at the ceiling. He could hear Theresa shifting in the bed, trying to find a comfortable position with her large belly. Without thinking, he said into the darkness, "Theresa, are you awake?" "Yes. This baby seems determined to keep me up tonight." Isaac took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "I need to tell you something, and you do not need to respond right away or at all if you do not want to, but I need to say it." He heard her stillness, her attention focused on him even in the dark. "What is it, Isaac?" "I have come to care for you very deeply, more than I should, probably. More than is wise given the circumstances." The words came out in a rush now that he had started. "I know you are planning to leave in the spring, and I know you have every reason not to trust men after what you went through. But I need you to know that if you wanted to stay, if you wanted to make this permanent, I would be honored. I would marry you and raise this child as my own. I would spend the rest of my life making sure you felt safe and cared for." The silence stretched out so long that Isaac began to regret speaking. Then he heard movement, and Theresa appeared beside his bedroll, wrapped in a blanket. She carefully lowered herself to sit beside him, and in the firelight he could see tears on her face. "Isaac," she said softly, "I care for you too. These past months have been the happiest I can remember despite everything. You have shown me what it means to be treated with true kindness and respect. But I am still married to Robert. Even though I left him, even though he hurt me, in the eyes of the law I am still his wife. I cannot marry you." Isaac sat up, hope and frustration warring in his chest. "You could get a divorce. It is possible, especially if you can prove he was violent. Do you know how expensive that is, how long it takes? And I would have to go back to Illinois to do it, which means he would know where I am." She shook her head. "I cannot risk that, not with the baby coming." "Then stay here without marrying me," Isaac said urgently. "Stay as my housekeeper, my friend, whatever you are comfortable with. Just stay. Let me help you raise this child. Let me protect you both." Theresa reached out and cupped his face with her hand, and Isaac leaned into the touch like a starving man offered food. "What would people in town say? They already think poorly of me for being pregnant and alone. If I stay here with you, unmarried, you will be judged too. Your reputation would suffer. I do not care about that. I do. You have built a life here, Isaac. You have plans for your ranch, your future. I will not let my presence ruin that for you." She withdrew her hand and struggled to stand. Isaac quickly helped her up. "This is not over," he said firmly. "I am not giving up on this on us." "There is no us," Theresa said sadly. "There cannot be. Please let us not speak of this again. It only makes everything harder." She returned to the bed, and Isaac lay back down, his mind racing. He did not accept her refusal. He could not. There had to be a way to make this work, to convince her that they could build a life together despite the obstacles. He would find that way, no matter what it took. The next few days were awkward between them. They were both too aware of what had been said, of the feelings that had been confessed. Isaac tried to give Theresa space while still taking care of her and the preparations for the baby's arrival. The finished cradle sat near the bed now, a constant reminder of what was coming. It was during this tense time that the doctor made his first visit to the cabin. Isaac had arranged for him to come check on Theresa well before the baby was due, just to make sure everything was progressing normally. Dr. Harrison was a stern older man with decades of experience, and he examined Theresa with professional efficiency. "Everything looks good," he pronounced. "The baby should come within the next few weeks. When your pain starts, send for me immediately. Even if it is the middle of the night, even if there is a storm, you send someone." He looked at Isaac. "Can you handle that?" "Yes, sir. I will ride for you the moment she needs you." The doctor packed up his bag. "I will say this to you both. I have been practicing medicine for 40 years, and I have learned not to judge the situations I encounter. What matters to me is the health of mother and child. Whatever your circumstances," he looked at Theresa kindly, "you are both fortunate to have someone reliable looking after you." After the doctor left, Theresa seemed lighter somehow, as if his reassurance had eased worries she had not even voiced. She was humming as she prepared dinner that evening, and Isaac allowed himself to hope that perhaps the awkwardness between them was fading. "I have been thinking," Theresa said as they ate. "When the baby comes, I will need to register the birth. I will use my maiden name, Turner, not Robert's surname. I want the baby to have no connection to him." "That makes sense," Isaac agreed. "What name will you use for yourself?" "Turner as well. As far as anyone in Ruby City knows, I am Miss Turner, never married. Let them think what they will." Isaac nodded slowly. "And if someone comes asking questions, looking for a Mrs. Robert, whatever his surname was?" "They would be looking for someone who does not exist here," Theresa said. "That is the point." It was a simple plan, but probably effective. Ruby City was far enough from Illinois that it was unlikely anyone would come looking. And as the doctor had said, most frontier folk were too busy with their own lives to pry deeply into others' business. 2 weeks later, in the early hours of a cold February morning, Theresa woke Isaac by calling his name urgently. He was up instantly, pulling on his boots. "The baby?" he asked. "I think so. The pain started about an hour ago, but now they are getting closer together." Even in the dim light from the banked fire, Isaac could see the fear on her face. "I am going for the doctor right now. Will you be all right until I get back?" "I do not have much choice," she said, trying to smile. "Hurry, please." Isaac threw on his coat and ran for the barn. He saddled his fastest horse and rode through the dark toward town, grateful that there was a moon to light his way. The journey that normally took 40 minutes took less than 30 as he pushed the horse hard. He pounded on the doctor's door until lights appeared inside. Dr. Harrison opened the door, already pulling on his coat. "It is time," he asked. "Yes. She says the pains are close together." "Help me hitch my buggy. I will need my full medical bag for this." Between the two of them, they had the doctor's horse hitched and ready in minutes. They made the journey back to the cabin as quickly as safely possible, though it felt agonizingly slow to Isaac. When they entered the cabin, they found Theresa pacing by the fire, one hand on her belly, breathing through a contraction. She looked up with relief when she saw them. "Thank goodness you are here," she said to the doctor. "Let us get you settled and see how far along you are," Dr. Harrison said calmly, his professional demeanor reassuring. He looked at Isaac. "Boil water, lots of it, and find all the clean cloths and towels you have." Isaac did as instructed, grateful to have specific tasks. He tried not to listen to what was happening behind the privacy screen the doctor had erected, but he could hear Theresa's occasional sounds of pain, and it made his chest tight with worry. The hours that followed were the longest of Isaac's life. He kept the fire going, kept water hot, and tried to stay out of the way. Occasionally, the doctor would emerge to request something or to give him brief updates. The baby was coming but slowly, which was normal for a first child. Theresa was doing well. Everything was progressing as it should. but Isaac could hear the exhaustion in Theresa's voice as the morning wore on into afternoon, and his helplessness ate at him. He wanted to do something, anything, to make this easier for her. Finally, as the winter sun was beginning to set, Isaac heard a new sound, a thin, wavering cry. He was on his feet instantly, staring at the privacy screen. "You have a healthy baby boy," the doctor called out. "Good-sized, good lungs, everything looks perfect." Isaac felt his knees go weak with relief. He sank back into his chair, suddenly aware that his hands were shaking. A boy. Theresa had a son. It was another hour before the doctor emerged, rolling down his sleeves. "Mother and baby are both doing well. She is exhausted, as you would expect, but the delivery went smoothly. The baby is strong and healthy." "Can I see them?" Isaac asked. "Give her a few more minutes to get settled. Then yes." The doctor packed up his instruments. "I will come back in a few days to check on them both. In the meantime, make sure she rests as much as possible. She can feed the baby but should stay in bed for at least a week." "Can you manage the household tasks?" "Yes, of course." "Good, and congratulations." The doctor pulled on his coat. "That is a fine boy you have there." Isaac did not correct the doctor's assumption. Instead, he walked him out and paid him for his services, adding extra for the trip in winter weather. Then he returned to the cabin and carefully approached the privacy screen. "Theresa, can I come in?" "Yes, please." Isaac rounded the screen and stopped, his breath catching. Theresa was propped up in bed, looking pale and tired but radiant. In her arms, wrapped in one of the blankets she had brought from Illinois, was a tiny red-faced baby with a shock of dark hair. "Come meet him," Theresa said softly. Isaac approached slowly, almost reverently. He had seen newborn calves and foals, but this was different. This was a human baby, impossibly small and perfect. The baby's eyes were closed, his little fist pressed against his mouth. "He is beautiful," Isaac said, his voice rough with emotion. "Would you like to hold him?" Theresa offered. "I do not want to break him." She laughed softly. "You will not break him. Here, sit on the edge of the bed and support his head." Isaac sat carefully and let Theresa transfer the baby into his arms. The weight was almost nothing, but the responsibility felt enormous. He looked down at the tiny face and felt something shift fundamentally in his chest. This was it. This was what love felt like, instant and overwhelming and absolute. "What are you going to name him?" Isaac asked, unable to look away from the baby. Theresa was quiet for a moment, then said, "I was thinking about what you said, about names you liked. You mentioned your father's name was Thomas." "It was." "Then I would like to name him Thomas, Tommy for short, if that is all right with you." Isaac looked up at her sharply, seeing the meaning behind the gesture. She was honoring him, acknowledging his role in her life and the baby's. "You do not have to do that." "I want to. You have been more of a father to this child already than his biological father ever was. You built him a cradle, you made sure I was safe and cared for. You deserve to be honored in his name." Isaac felt tears prick his eyes, which embarrassed him, but he did not care. "Thomas Turner. It is a good, strong name. I think so too." Theresa reached out and took Isaac's hand. "I have been thinking about what you said a few weeks ago, about staying." Isaac's heart leaped, but he forced himself to stay calm. "And? I want to stay if the offer is still open. I want Tommy to grow up here with you, but I cannot marry you, Isaac. Not yet. Maybe not ever, depending on what it would take to legally end my marriage to Robert. I need you to understand that and accept it." "I understand. And I accept it. You can stay for as long as you want, under any terms you are comfortable with. I just want you here. Both of you." He looked down at the baby in his arms. "I will take care of you both, I promise." "I know you will." Theresa squeezed his hand. "And Isaac, I love you. I need you to know that. Even if we cannot be married, I love you." "I love you too." Isaac carefully leaned over and kissed her forehead, mindful of the baby between them. "Now you should rest. Do you want me to put Tommy in his cradle?" "Yes, please." Isaac stood and carried the baby to the beautiful wooden cradle he had built. He laid Tommy down gently, tucking the blanket around him. The baby stirred but did not wake, apparently content in his new bed. As promised, Isaac took over all the household tasks while Theresa recovered from giving birth. He cooked meals, cleaned, did laundry, and tended the animals. In between, he found himself constantly checking on Theresa and Tommy, unable to stay away for long. He discovered that babies required a lot of attention. Tommy needed to eat every few hours, day and night, which meant Theresa was constantly exhausted. Isaac tried to help however he could, bringing her food and water while she nursed the baby, changing Tommy's diapers when needed, and rocking the cradle when the baby fussed. There was something deeply satisfying about these tasks, about taking care of his little family. Because that was what they were now, Isaac realized. A family. Maybe not in the traditional sense, maybe not in a way that would satisfy conventional society, but a family nonetheless. 2 weeks after Tommy's birth, the weather finally began to turn. The snow started melting, revealing brown grass underneath. Icicles dripped from the cabin's eaves and the days grew noticeably longer. Spring was coming. Theresa was recovering well, regaining her strength quickly. She was a devoted mother, attentive to Tommy's every need. Isaac loved watching her with the baby, seeing the fierce, protective love in her eyes when she looked at her son. One evening in early March, after they had put Tommy down for the night in his cradle, Theresa brought up a topic Isaac had been avoiding thinking about. "I should go into town soon," she said. "I need to register Tommy's birth and I should start looking for work. I have been living off your charity for 4 months now. I need to start contributing financially." "You do contribute," Isaac protested. "You cook and clean and manage the household." "That has value." "It does, but it does not bring in money, and I will need money to buy things for Tommy as he grows. I cannot expect you to pay for everything." Isaac sat down across from her. "What kind of work were you thinking of, Mrs.?" Patterson had mentioned sewing and laundry in her letters. "I am good at both. I thought I might take in work from people in town, things I could do here at the cabin while still caring for Tommy." It was a practical plan, and Isaac could not really argue against it. "All right. When you feel ready, we can go into town and you can put out word that you are available for work." "Thank you." Theresa hesitated, then added, "I have been thinking about something else too. When we go to town, people will have questions about us, about our situation. We should probably decide what we are going to tell them." Isaac had been thinking about this too. "The truth, mostly. You needed a place to stay, I had room, so you are boarding here in exchange for helping with the household. Simple and straightforward." "And what about Tommy?" "What will you tell people about your relationship to him?" "That I care about him like he was my own," Isaac said firmly. "Because I do. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me." Theresa smiled. "You are a good man, Isaac Jennings. I hope you know that." They made the trip to town the following week. It was Theresa's first time away from the cabin since arriving in the blizzard back in December. She held Tommy bundled in her arms as Isaac drove the wagon down roads that were muddy with snowmelt. Ruby City looked different in the early spring sunshine. The town was busier now that winter's grip had loosened, with people moving about their business. Isaac helped Theresa down from the wagon and they headed first to the courthouse to register Tommy's birth. The clerk was a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Fletcher who examined Theresa with undisguised curiosity. "The father's name?" she asked, pen poised over the register. "There is no father listed," Theresa said calmly. "It is just Thomas Isaac Turner, Mrs." Fletcher's eyebrows rose at the inclusion of Isaac as a middle name, and her gaze flicked between Theresa and Isaac. But to her credit, she simply wrote down the information without comment. Address. Isaac gave the location of his cabin, and Mrs. Fletcher made note of it. She completed the paperwork and handed Theresa a copy of the birth certificate. "Good day to you both," she said, her tone neutral but her eyes full of speculation. As they left the courthouse, Theresa sighed. "Well, that will be all over town by evening." "Let people talk," Isaac said. "We know the truth of things. That is what matters." They made several more stops. At the general store, Theresa placed an order for fabric and sewing supplies, explaining to the proprietor that she was available for sewing work. At the doctor's office, Dr. Harrison examined Tommy and pronounced him thriving. At the boarding house that had replaced Mrs. Patterson's establishment, Theresa left word that she was available for laundry services. By the time they headed home, Theresa had received several interested responses about her sewing skills. "I think I will have plenty of work," she told Isaac as they bounced along in the wagon. "Mrs. Henderson wants me to make her a new dress, and Mr. Walters asked if I could mend his Sunday suit." "That is good news." Isaac glanced at her. "How do you feel about how things went today?" "It was better than I feared," Theresa admitted. "People were curious but not cruel. At least not to my face. They would not dare be cruel to your face, not while I was standing right there." Isaac's voice held a hint of protectiveness that made Theresa smile. Over the following weeks, Theresa's sewing business took off. It seemed that Ruby City had been in need of a good seamstress, and word spread quickly about her skills. People from town started making the trip out to the cabin to bring her work or pick up finished items. Isaac found he enjoyed these visits. It gave the cabin a livelier feel, and he liked seeing Theresa interact confidently with her customers. She had a good head for business, charging fair prices but not undervaluing her work. As spring progressed into early summer, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Isaac worked his ranch, gradually building up his herd and making improvements to the property. Theresa sewed and cared for Tommy, who was growing rapidly and becoming more alert and responsive each day. In the evenings, they would sit together and talk, or Isaac would read aloud from one of Theresa's books while she worked on her sewing. It felt like a marriage in every way that mattered except the legal one. They shared a home, shared responsibilities, shared the care of Tommy. The only thing they did not share was a bed, with Isaac still sleeping on his bedroll by the fire. It was an arrangement that satisfied propriety but increasingly frustrated Isaac. He wanted more. He wanted to be Theresa's husband in truth, not just in feeling. He wanted the right to hold her, to kiss her, to share her bed. But he respected her boundaries and the very real legal complications that prevented them from marrying. One evening in late June, after a particularly warm day, Theresa put Tommy down in his cradle and then came to sit beside Isaac on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I have been thinking," she said quietly, "about us." Isaac's heart rate picked up, but he kept his voice calm. "What about us?" "I love you. I think I have loved you since you carried me into this cabin out of the snow. And I am grateful for everything you have done for me and Tommy, but I do not think this arrangement is fair to you." "What do you mean?" "I mean you are 26 years old. You should have a real wife, children of your own. Instead, you are stuck taking care of someone else's child and living with a woman you cannot marry." Theresa turned to look at him. "You could have so much more than this, Isaac." "I do not want more than this," Isaac said firmly. "I want you. I want Tommy. This is enough for me." "But what if it does not have to be enough? What if there was a way for us to be together properly?" Isaac sat forward, suddenly very focused. "What are you saying?" I wrote to my cousin in Illinois, the one who helped me when I first left Robert. I asked her to investigate what it would take to get a divorce. Theresa pulled a letter from her pocket. She wrote back. She said Robert has been telling everyone I abandoned him, that he is the victim. But she also said he has been seen around town with another woman, one he is apparently courting openly. So he has moved on, Isaac said, beginning to understand where this was going. It seems so. My cousin thinks that if I filed for divorce, Robert might not even contest it. He has his reputation as the injured party, and apparently he is eager to remarry. A divorce would free him to do that. But you would have to go back to Illinois to file, Isaac said, the hope that had been building suddenly deflating. You would have to face him. I would need a lawyer there to file the paperwork, yes, but I might not have to face Robert directly. I could send money for the lawyer's fees and have everything handled at a distance. Theresa took Isaac's hand. It would not be quick. It might take a year or more. But if it worked, if I could get the divorce, then we could marry properly. Would you be willing to wait for that? Isaac brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. I would wait as long as it took. Are you certain this is what you want? I am certain. I want to be your wife, Isaac. I want Tommy to have your name legally. I want us to be a real family. She paused. I never thought I would want to marry again after what Robert did to me. But you have shown me that not all men are like him. You have been patient and kind and respectful. You have earned my trust and my love. Isaac pulled her close, and she leaned her head against his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, watching the last of the sunset fade to darkness, making plans for their future. The next day, Theresa wrote to her cousin with instructions to find a good lawyer and begin divorce proceedings. She included most of the money she had earned from sewing, keeping back only what she needed for immediate expenses. It felt strange to send so much hard-earned money away, but it was an investment in their future. The lawyer's response came 6 weeks later. He was willing to take the case, and believed he could secure a divorce on grounds of abandonment and cruelty, especially if Theresa's cousin could find witnesses to Robert's new relationship and his previous violence. The process would indeed take time, possibly more than a year, but it was achievable. Isaac and Theresa celebrated this news quietly that evening after Tommy was asleep. They stood together on the porch, and Isaac finally allowed himself to kiss her properly. It was their first real kiss, sweet and full of promise, and when they pulled apart, Theresa was smiling. I have wanted to do that for months, Isaac admitted. I have wanted you to, Theresa replied, but I needed to wait until I knew for certain we had a future. We have a future, Isaac said firmly. Whatever it takes, however long we have to wait, we have a future. The months that followed were perhaps the happiest of Isaac's life despite the waiting. Theresa continued her sewing business, becoming well known throughout the area for her skill. Isaac's ranch continued to grow and prosper. And Tommy thrived, developing from a tiny infant into a cheerful, curious baby who smiled at everyone and seemed to love the world. Legal letters went back and forth between Ruby City and Illinois. The process was slow and sometimes frustrating, but it was progressing. Robert had indeed agreed not to contest the divorce once he understood that he would be free to marry his new companion. Witnesses had been found to testify to his violence toward Theresa. Everything was moving in the right direction. Isaac built an addition onto the cabin that fall, adding a second bedroom. Officially, it was so that Theresa could have more privacy and Tommy could have his own space as he grew. Unofficially, it was the first step toward building the family home Isaac envisioned, a place with room for the children he hoped they would have together someday. Winter came again, but this year was completely different from the last. The cabin was warm and full of life, with Tommy babbling and crawling everywhere, keeping both adults constantly entertained. They celebrated Tommy's first birthday in late February with a small cake Theresa baked, and Isaac carved Tommy a set of wooden blocks as a gift. "I cannot believe he is already 1 year old," Theresa marveled, watching Tommy smash cake into his face with gleeful abandon. "It feels like just yesterday that I arrived in that blizzard." "That was the best blizzard of my life," Isaac said, making Theresa laugh. Spring returned, and with it came the letter they had been waiting for. The divorce was final. Theresa was legally free to remarry. Isaac read the letter 3 times to make sure he understood correctly, then looked at Theresa with a grin spreading across his face. "You are really free." "I am really free," she confirmed, tears of relief and joy streaming down her face. Isaac swept her into his arms and spun her around, making her laugh and cry at the same time. Tommy, playing on the floor with his blocks, looked up at the commotion and clapped his hands, not understanding what was happening but feeding off their joy. "Marry me," Isaac said, setting Theresa down but keeping his hands on her waist. "Marry me right now, today. Let us go into town and find the preacher." "Today," Theresa laughed. "Isaac, we should at least plan a little bit. I should make a nice dress. You should invite friends." "I do not need any of that. I just need you to say yes." "Yes," Theresa said, pulling his face down for a kiss. "Yes, I will marry you. Today, tomorrow, whenever you want." They compromised by waiting 3 days, just long enough for Theresa to alter one of her nicer dresses and for Isaac to ride to the neighboring ranch to invite the Harrington family, who had become friends over the past year. They held the ceremony in the small church in Ruby City, with Reverend Mills officiating. It was a simple wedding but perfect for them. Theresa wore a deep blue dress that brought out her eyes, with her hair pinned up and decorated with wildflowers Isaac had picked that morning. Isaac wore his best suit, the one Theresa had mended months ago, with a new shirt she had made specially for the occasion. Tommy, dressed in a little suit Theresa had sewn, was held by Mrs. Harrington during the ceremony. When Reverend Mills pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed Theresa thoroughly, not caring that they were in church or that people were watching. This was his wife, legally and truly, and he wanted everyone to know how much he loved her. The small gathering of townspeople applauded, and if anyone remembered the scandal of Theresa arriving pregnant and unmarried just over a year ago, they had the grace not to mention it. As far as Ruby City was concerned, Isaac and Theresa were a respectable married couple, and Tommy was being raised by a man who loved him like a son. After the ceremony, they had a small celebration at the cabin. Mrs. Harrington had brought food, and a few other families from town stopped by with congratulations and gifts. It was nothing fancy, but it felt right. That evening, after everyone had left and Tommy was asleep in his new bedroom, Isaac and Theresa were finally alone as husband and wife. They stood together in the main room, suddenly almost shy with each other despite having lived together for over a year. "Well, Mrs. Jennings," Isaac said, taking her hands, "how does it feel to be married?" "It feels right," Theresa answered. "It feels like everything has finally fallen into place." She squeezed his hands. "I know I have said this before, but thank you. Thank you for taking us in, for caring for Tommy, for being patient while I worked through my past. Thank you for loving me." "Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done," Isaac said honestly. He led her toward their bedroom, the one that had been only hers until tonight. "Now come on, wife. We have a lot of time to make up for." The years that followed were full and happy. Isaac's ranch grew into one of the most successful in the area, known for quality cattle and horses. Theresa's sewing business continued to thrive, though she eventually had to turn away work because she was too busy with other responsibilities. Those responsibilities multiplied when their daughter Emma was born 2 years after their wedding, followed by a son they named Henry 3 years after that. Tommy, who had no memory of any father but Isaac, grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved helping with the ranch work. Isaac legally adopted Tommy when the boy was 4 years old, giving him the Jennings surname. Tommy was thrilled to officially have the same name as his baby sister and the father he adored. The paperwork was simple since Robert had relinquished all parental rights as part of the divorce, wanting no connection to his former wife or her child. The cabin continued to grow over the years, with Isaac adding rooms as needed to accommodate their expanding family. What had started as a simple bachelor's dwelling became a proper family home, always full of noise and laughter and love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac and Theresa stood on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Tommy, now 12, was teaching 8-year-old Emma how to throw a rope, while 5-year-old Henry chased chickens around the yard with more enthusiasm than success. "You ever think about that day in the blizzard?" Isaac asked, his arm around Theresa's waist. "Sometimes," Theresa said. "I think about how terrified I was, how uncertain of the future. I thought my life was over in so many ways. Instead, it was just beginning." It was. Theresa leaned her head on his shoulder. "If someone had told me that day that 10 years later I would be standing here with you, with 3 beautiful children and a real home, I would never have believed them. It seemed impossible." "Nothing is impossible," Isaac said. "Not when you have someone who loves you standing beside you." "I love you, Isaac Jennings. I loved you when you caught my arm in that blizzard. I loved you when you built Tommy his cradle, and I love you now. I will love you for the rest of my life." Isaac turned her in his arms and kissed her, long and sweet, while their children played and the Montana sun shone down on their ranch. This was home. This was family. This was everything he had ever wanted. That night, after the children were in bed, Isaac went to the barn and retrieved something he had kept stored there. It was the cradle he had built all those years ago for Tommy. He carried it into the house and set it in the main room where Theresa could see it. "Why did you bring that in?" she asked, looking at the cradle with fond nostalgia. "Because you are pregnant again," Isaac said with a knowing smile. "I figured we would need it soon." Theresa's eyes widened, her hand going to her belly. "How did you know? I only just realized it myself." "I know you, I know the signs." He pulled her close. "So is it true?" "It is true. Another baby due in the spring," she laughed. "How do you feel about that?" "I feel like the luckiest man in Montana, in the whole world actually." Isaac kissed her forehead. "Another baby to love, another child to raise together. What could be better than that?" "Nothing," Theresa agreed. "Absolutely nothing." The baby, another boy they named Daniel, arrived in April, delivered safely with Dr. Harrison's help. True to form, he slept peacefully in the cradle Isaac had built so long ago, the same cradle that had held Tommy, Emma, and Henry. It was a symbol of where their family had begun, of the love and care that Isaac had shown from the very first. As the years continued to pass, the Jennings family became a fixture in Ruby City. Isaac served on the town council and helped establish a school. Theresa taught Sunday school and organized charity efforts for families in need. Their children grew up strong and healthy, each one knowing they were loved and valued. Tommy eventually took over much of the ranch work from Isaac, proving himself a natural horseman and cattleman. Emma developed her mother's talent for sewing, but also showed an interest in teaching, eventually becoming a school teacher herself. Henry split his time between helping Tommy on the ranch and studying law books Isaac ordered for him from back east. Daniel, the youngest, was still finding his way, but he showed promise in everything he tried. On a warm summer evening many years after that first blizzard, Isaac and Theresa sat together on their porch. They were older now, with gray in their hair and lines on their faces earned from years of hard work and laughter. But they still sat close together, still held hands, still looked at each other with love. "You have any regrets?" Isaac asked. "About how your life turned out?" Theresa thought for a moment, then shook her head. "No, not a single one. Everything I went through, all the pain and fear and uncertainty, it brought me here. It brought me to you. I would not change that for anything." "Good," Isaac said, kissing her hand. "Because I am not done with you yet, wife. We have many more years ahead of us." "I certainly hope so," Theresa said with a smile. "I have grown quite fond of you over the years, husband. I would hate to cut things short now." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant colors, secure in their love and the life they had built together. The blizzard that had brought them together was long past, but its gift remained. A family, a home, a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. Inside the house, the cradle Isaac had built before spring sat in a place of honor, a reminder of where it all began. The cowboy who had helped a desperate woman in a snowstorm had given her so much more than shelter. He had given her safety, respect, love, and a future she had never dared to dream of, and she had given him the same in return. Together, they had built not just a cradle or a cabin, but an entire life full of joy and purpose and love that would last for generations to come. As the stars began to appear overhead and the cool evening air settled around them, Isaac and Theresa rose and went inside their home, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring. Because they would face it together, as they had faced everything since that December blizzard so many years ago. Their story was complete, their circle closed. They had found each other in the storm, built a life in the wilderness, and created a love that would endure. The cowboy had built a cradle before spring, but what he had really built was so much more. He had built a family, a legacy, and a love story for the ages. The end came peacefully for both of them, many years later, surrounded by children and grandchildren who carried on their legacy of love and strength. The ranch continued to thrive under Tommy's care, and his siblings all found their own paths to happiness. The cradle was passed down through generations, used by each new baby born into the family, a tangible link to the love story that had started it all. Ruby City grew and changed over the decades, but the Jennings family remained a constant, respected and admired by all who knew them. And sometimes, on cold winter nights, old-timers would tell the story of how it all began. How a woman arrived pregnant in a December blizzard, and how a cowboy took her in and built a cradle before spring. How that simple act of kindness blossomed into one of the greatest love stories Ruby City had ever known. It was a story of redemption and second chances, of love overcoming obstacles, of two broken people finding wholeness together. It was a story that reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes the worst storms bring us exactly where we need to be, to find exactly who we need to find. And in the end, that was the true legacy of Isaac and Theresa Jennings. Not just the ranch or the family or the cradle, but the enduring proof that love, real love, can transform lives and create something beautiful out of even the darkest circumstances. Their love had been tested by hardship, strengthened by patience, and ultimately perfected by commitment and devotion. They had lived full lives, raised wonderful children, built a thriving ranch, and most importantly, loved each other deeply every single day. When their time finally came, they left behind not just material possessions, but a legacy of love that would influence generations. The cradle that Isaac built still exists, carefully maintained and treasured by the Jennings family. A beautiful reminder that sometimes the simplest acts of love and care can change everything. It stands as a testament to a cowboy who saw a woman in need and chose to help, and to a woman who found the courage to accept that help and build a new life. And so their story ends not with sadness, but with the satisfaction of lives well lived and love well given. Isaac and Theresa Jennings found each other in a December blizzard, built a life together before spring, and loved each other faithfully until their final days. Their story reminds us all that true love is worth waiting for, worth fighting for, and worth building a life around.